Hey guys, thanks for joining me on this morning report. The main idea of this morning report is to give you an idea of how much power there is in crowdsourcing the investigation of the origins of this virus. Very specifically, I think some magic is happening on Twitter right now, despite the fact that they don't want it to. There are a number, hundreds, if not thousands, of molecular biologists that are kind of bored right now during this pandemic shutdown. And they have been looking into the sequences that have been purported to describe the zoonotic track that this virus took from nature to our doorstep. These virus sequences that have been popping up left and right since January in various Nature papers and bioRxiv preprints have done really nothing for our understanding of the zoonotic events which led to the current pandemic, and in fact are starting to draw more and more questions about the possible laboratory origin, simply because how they are curiously combining the sequences as they come out and the sequences that were reported in the past. This started originally, as I detailed a couple rides ago, with the Nerd Has Power blog that first I think should be credited for noticing that the virus that was reported in the 2020 Shang-Chi Li Nature paper is actually a virus that was supposed to be collected in 2013. And this made it very sketchy from the perspective of this writer, because it had an interesting sequence at that time. Its homology to the original SARS, which was what that paper was trying to follow up on, the original SARS outbreak. That virus would have been infinitely more interesting than the viruses that they used to manipulate and understand, or purport to understand, the zoonotic event that underlied the SARS outbreak. So that Nature paper that came out in 2013 has been the center of this discussion for a long time. I pointed out a while ago, through the help of one of my viewers, that the bibliography of that paper from the original release in 2013 up until the current version that's on the Nature website has changed, and a number of those bibliographic references are actually pertinent to this discussion, because they provide methodological pieces to the puzzle in terms of showing what they knew, showing what they were investigating, and showing that all of those things, those papers, were providing pieces of the puzzle that could lead directly to SARS-CoV-2. Specifically, though, what that discovery in 2020 that originally happened on Twitter and with this Nerd Has Power blog points out is that this RATG13 virus sequence that was released at that time is actually most likely a keyboard combination of two previously found viruses by the Chinese army. That keyboard combination is a nice explanation, zoonotic explanation, for where this virus may have come from, but it's actually a smoking gun to the fact that they are covering up its laboratory origin. Now, this was still very, very gray area. This was still very debatable until about 17 hours ago, when a series of tweets happened on Twitter where the analysis of a current biology paper that came out, which showed, and then again, this is another one of those things where conveniently enough, we've found another bat virus that seems to explain another problem with the natural origins story theory. So another problem with the natural origin story theory was this furin cleavage site. This furin cleavage site is a site in the S protein, the spike protein, that helps it to enter more cells and helps it to enter cells more efficiently. And in fact, it's been shown in previous papers from Barrick's lab and other labs that the cleavage of the spike protein assists in the cell entry, and insists in increasing virulence. So the idea that there would be a furin cleavage site is not strange, but it is strange from the perspective that they don't have any record of a bat virus with a spike protein showing this particular enzyme site, cleavage site. So why is this significant? Well, because conveniently a few days ago in Current Biology, a paper purporting to have found a bat virus with a furin cleavage site came out. This paper was then analyzed by our Twitter army, and these molecular biologists, some very clever dudes, have found that actually they did something quite shady here, and they deleted part of the sequence of this of one of the genes for one of the proteins. They deleted part of the sequence. And when looking into what this sequence was, there became all sorts of fishy leads. One of the fishy leads was that this was maybe a protein tag that was associated with amplification in a clone system. That would be like taking a small piece of DNA and then making many, many copies of it using some kind of industrial produced or commercially available amplification product. And in that case, a lot of times protein tags are used and then later removed with some kind of chemical treatment. So it was thought to be one of those tags. And then as we got into it further and the analysis came out further, it looked like that it might have even been a human protein encoding for apoptosis. If that's the case, then we have a serious smoking gun on our hands, because that human protein would have never come up in any Monte Carlo bat coronavirus casino that would occur in nature. This would have only happened in a laboratory. So that's what this discussion on in the bike is about. Maybe I already spoiled it all here, but well, you can use this as the wrap up then. And so thanks for joining me on this bike ride, and I hope to see you on the next morning report. If you liked it, like and subscribe. Take care of yourself and each other. I'll see you soon. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day in the neighbor. Oh, won't you be mine? Oh, won't you be mine? Looks like JC in the morning. Episode 2 is about to roll. That acoustic terrorist lives right underneath my awning. And every morning at about 5, he gets up and starts singing that song. Usually right outside our window first, and now he's moved around. It's a house wren, I think, a little demon. I think he's lived with us for 5 years now or so, 4 years. What in the hell's going on? I can't get my radio on the back here. That's better. All right, I'm leaving at about 5 minutes before noon, so it's still the morning report. So I'm going to start talking right away this morning because it's quite a big deal. I got a lot to cover. It might take the ride here and the ride home. But as you know, the morning ride is a little bit tougher because I got two hills, two big untimely hills. And the first big hill is right now. So before I start climbing it, I just want to say that the drama, the question of the origin story of this virus is important. And the reason why it is important is because if this is a natural virus, chances are we don't have much to fear, and we're just going to have to endure whatever consequences there are, and we will come out in the end stronger as a human race, and we'll have one more endemic coronavirus to deal with every year. That's the natural course. That's the natural course that Knut Witkowski and Wolfgang Wodak are arguing for. The other side of this coin is nasty. And that is that this is a virus with heretofore unseen combinations of functionality that would have never come to exist in nature. Because the genetic tools that we have invented over the last 20 years can be used nefariously, even in the context of good intentions. It's very easy to mistake ignorance, incompetence, arrogance for outright evil. They could have just been stupid. And in their overzealous attempts to understand coronavirus biology, these fools engineered all kinds of things in their laboratories to try and explore how these crafty little things work. And in the end, they could have had, and probably did have, thousands of these things. Thousands of different experiments. You know, this virus, this chimera, that chimera, that didn't really produce any results that they could put in a paper, but were part of this exploratory recombination circus, this exploratory gain of function circus that they're so sure could not have produced SARS-CoV-2. It drives me crazy. And now the Twitter universe has brought together some very aggressive and intelligent people who, after much convincing, have brought real scientists onto the side of skepticism. Now, I will grant you that there aren't a lot of virologists who have yet publicly crossed over to the skepticism side. But there are a whole bunch of biologists and immunologists and epidemiologists and physicists and other fairly intelligent people who have. And on Twitter there are a couple superheroes that I suspect are fueled mostly by nicotine and caffeine that are simply rocking right now. And if you want to be on the cutting edge of these theories, and you want to watch the charades be called out in real time, I'm going to be flashing a few key players up on the screen that you need to be following on Twitter. And I'm not going to suggest you follow me, because you're already watching my video. I'm talking about people's primary deal is they're reading this stuff and analyzing this stuff, and they're molecular biologists who know how to use the same alignment tools and sequencing databases that these virologists appear to be leveraging to cover their tracks. And today and yesterday, some very serious developments occurred. And really in the last week, these developments occurred. Shit. And I'm really excited about them because they're all kind of happening so fast, because the word is getting out. And the system of science is really funny, because over the last 10 or 15 years, the system of science has become sort of middle heavy and bottom heavy, and in the sense of there are so many well-trained scientists who are probably never going to have the opportunity to lead their own research group and to investigate their own research questions. It's just not going to happen. We're training so many PhDs. That's the reason why they make this joke all the time about, you know, your PhD is worthless. Anybody can get one of those. Because if you can get into the program, you're going to graduate. That's the way it works. That's true. You're going to have to work really hard, and you're going to learn to be a scientist. The only thing that shows you is that science is just hard work. And I've never claimed anything else. If you're willing to read enough and learn enough about the subject you're interested in, you can scientifically contribute to the understanding of that subject. Doesn't matter what that subject is. Just how hard are you willing to work so that you become the expert that's on the cutting edge? That's what science is all about. And I would admit, for myself, I don't even know if I'm there anymore. At one point, I was at the very cutting edge of trying to understand how the medial entorhinal cortex encoded space. That's where my research sat. And the interesting thing is here now that there are literally hundreds of postdocs who are worried about where their next job is going to be, are unable to go into their lab and work, maybe don't have experiments to write up, but these people are all sharp as knives, and they're bored, and they're at home alone, or home with their wife, or home with their husband, and they are curious. As scientists, biologists, smart people, they are curious as to what's really going on. And the contradictory messages that we've talked about, like yesterday morning, those contradictory messages in the minds of a postdoc, those are annoying. Those almost hurt like a splinter in your eye. And so these molecular biologists that are bored and have the requisite knowledge to investigate this are doing it. And some of them are on Twitter. And it's amazing to watch this happen in real time, because one of them will identify a potential problem, and 4 or 5 of them will follow up in the next 10 hours. And this thread will slowly expand into, oh, I ran that through BLAST. If you do the protein sequence on that, you find this. Oh, that's a protein. Oh, wow. Surprise, surprise. They're full of baloney. And the recent one started with a sequence, and this is what's going to be hard for me to sort of explain on the ride, because I just read this one this morning, and I read it right before I got on the bicycle. But I've been trying to teach, my wife and I have been trying to teach my kids how to shoot bow, and so they were shooting this morning, and I didn't get out on time because I had to help. Anyway, I read it right before I got on the bike, and the gist of it is that a paper came out in Current Biology which purported to show a bat virus which had a sequence very similar to this one in the joint between the S1 and S2 domains of the receptor binding domain of the spike protein. And long story short, they were claiming that this was evidence that the furin cleavage site, this place where, in case you don't know, if the spike protein is cleaved, if it's cut, part of the effectiveness of the virus is if that spike protein can be cut by an enzyme of the host. And so having a furin cleavage site built into the spike protein is handy. It makes it more virulent. It makes it more effective. And so the question of this furin cleavage site is important because they hadn't found a bat virus with an S protein, with an S protein, spike protein that had this. And so this was one of the things that a lot of people have been pointing out as well. You know where you get one of those? You get one of those by enriching a virus against a culture background or against an animal background where you select for that. And so this was and has been pointed to many times as one of the best pieces of evidence for the fact that this was an engineered virus. So just like with the homology between bats and the missing spike protein problem, the ACE2 specific spike protein problem, and then now all these papers come out saying that they found a bat virus that explains it. Well, here comes another paper out to explain where the furin protease cleavage site, where this arose from nature. And this is a bit like asking a defendant, where were you on the night of the crime? And then when the defendant tells you a story that he could just make up or she could just make up, you just take her word for it. This is all coming after the fact, and way too fast after the fact, way too conveniently after the fact. And then, because this story gets amplified on Twitter, and they leave their dog shit behind, thank you, nice dogs. Would you pick up your shit though? I don't know why I don't tell them, but I don't know. I'm not a policeman. Anyway, so this sort of, indiscrepancy caught the eye of Twitter, and then they started blasting this sequence, and the first thing that got pointed out by one of the scientists on there is that their alignment was weak. That they somehow decided to discard the front of the sequence and started a new start codon. And that would take a long time to explain. You can better read that thread, but let's just say, to make a long story short, that there are specific sequences of bases in the DNA code and in the RNA code which signal where, or signify where, the ribosome should attach and start transcribing the protein. And so a molecular biologist can look through the codes of any animal, or in this case virus, and see where the protein will start. And so you can look at a sequence and say, okay, you could start a protein from here, and then here's a stop codon. This is the second hill, so I'm gonna have to stop talking in a minute. And then here's a start codon and here's a stop codon. So what they did was edit the sequence to remove the first start codon, or something like that. And so these guys on Twitter kept investigating and found an interesting thing, that somehow this sequence looks like it was manipulated to be amplified in a clone background. So what that means is, if you use a particular commercial bacteria amplifying system, so you make a lot of copies of the same DNA, you would have this sort of special sequence in the beginning that you could later eliminate with chemical treatment or something like that. So at first they thought it was a sequence like this, that it was just a protein tag, and that this is engineered. And then another guy comes on and says, no, that's not true. It's not just, that's just a funny Wikipedia hit. But actually this will translate. And the protein sequence is this. And then, here's where it gets very scary. They did a sequence, or searched protein blast search, that 16 or 18 amino acid sequence, and they found a 100% homology with a protein that has been denoted as a death-inducing protein. And when you talk about death on the cellular level, you're talking about apoptosis. So if this data is correct, then the protein separated by a start codon that they eliminated or took off of the sequence is actually a small protein that would express if the virus was being replicated in your own cells. And if that protein expressed, it would cause apoptosis or cell death in the cells that were also replicating the virus. And now if that is not gain of function, and the fact that that's a human, if this turns out to be really a human specific protein sequence, then there is no Monte Carlo biological bat casino in the universe that could generate that by chance. And why is this important? It's important because what I said in the beginning of the ride. If this is natural and this is just a bat virus, then the real truth is we're going to have to deal with the consequences. A certain number of people are going to die until the virus either goes away through mutation and becoming less virulent, or it goes away because of a combination of herd immunity and the sort of fizzling out of the spread. That's the natural course. And again, as I said in the beginning, that's what Knut Witkowski and Wolfgang Wodak would be assuming. They are assuming that it's a natural virus and that the pandemic freakout is just a theater to economically leverage what is just a normal biological phenomenon. That would be kind of the false flag conspiracy explanation for what's going on here. The alternative explanation is where we started already in January, and when I was most scared in January and now I'm scared again, is if this activity that occurred early in January and in China with all the welding of buildings shut and the videos of people collapsing on the street are real. And they're real because this is not a natural virus, but it is a virus that has been engineered in the laboratory, and because it's never been out before, we actually don't have any idea of what sort of attributes as a pathogen it might have. We could have guessed, they could have guessed when they were making it that, yeah, if we put this protein in here, maybe the virus would be real nasty. We should see. But then they didn't expect it probably to get out into the population. They probably expected to test it in monkeys. Or even worse, even more safe, they might have just wanted to test it in cell culture. But then it got out, and anywhere that it's able to gain hold, it goes bananas. And we couldn't predict that because you just can't predict those things. We don't know enough about viruses to predict those things. We can guess. And that's the reason why they justify doing the gain of function in the first place, right? We don't know this stuff, so we got to learn it. But then what they don't want you to think about is the fact that if you create a pandemic virus that didn't exist before in the laboratory, you have increased our risk of pandemic, not decreased it. Because the virus didn't exist before. Now if you do this on the scale of not a couple viruses in a Nature 2013 paper, which is again what they'd like you to believe, but if you did it en masse, screening for all different sorts of viruses, and you don't even know what you got. You're just screening for one thing, but you're pulling all kinds of other things down. And then you're reporting the one or two interesting things that you found. And all that other stuff just goes in the cabinet, or you say would get destroyed. But the bottom line is that at some point all that stuff is happening, which would not be happening if we weren't doing it in a laboratory. It's only happening because we're doing it in a laboratory. And that's the reason why they don't want you to think about the fact that this could have come from a laboratory. They don't want you to think about that. And I think the reason why is because it probably did. That's the reason for the extra panic. That's the reason for the extra ridiculousness. And now the only question is why was Bill Gates so sure of it 3 months ago? Why was he so sure that we were going to need a vaccine? He was so sure that we would never be able to open up until there was a vaccine. And then you can only think the worst. Then you can only think that this was part of a larger orchestration. And you can't blame anybody for coming to that conclusion at this stage because it's just too ridiculous. The amount of protest against the possibility of gain of function being the source of this virus is absurd. The arguments that they use against the possibility that this is a laboratory virus, those arguments are absurd. And the evidence in the modern bibliography of coronavirus biology is so obnoxious. The evidence is so obvious from a biological perspective. Not only could we have made this virus, but if you assume that behind these papers are many attempts to engineer things that didn't turn out the way that they wanted one way or another, as is evident from the kinds of things that we're seeing now. It's a combination of deception and, oh yeah, we had that too. So you had all these pangolin viruses and you had all these bat viruses, and they were all in the same place at the same time, but you want us to believe that they combined in nature and jumped out of nature to get us, even though the one place we know for sure that they came in close contact with each other was in that Wuhan lab. Oh my gosh. Don't you see how silly this is? And the reason why America won't do anything about it is because we funded it all. And in the end, it might come out that the Chinese weren't responsible. Doesn't it make the most sense that way? I'll throw out a crazy theory right here. Why wouldn't the United States let it out in Wuhan? Blame it on them. And then when it comes here, they use it to their advantage. And biologically speaking, it was pretty likely that by the time it got here, it wouldn't be as bad as it started. That seems to be the case. That would have been a reasonable guess. Put it in a really big city in China, maybe it would even mutate itself out of virulence before it ever got here. That would have also been kind of a reasonable dice to roll if you were some kind of weird, the table of 120 people that run the show. I mean, overpopulation is a real problem, guys. They talk about it all the time. Bill Gates has talked about how he can use vaccines to reduce the world's population. That quote's not fake. How does that work? It works because if you require people to get vaccinated, and when they get vaccinated they also get sterilized, you can control the world's population. And that's the story of Kenya with Bill Gates, that the Catholic bishops and the doctors are united in protest of, that nobody wants to talk about, that everybody says is a conspiracy theory. We need to find out if that's a conspiracy theory or not. Because Bill Gates was sure we would need a vaccine. And we don't need a vaccine if this is a naturally occurring zoonotic coronavirus. But if this is a engineered gain-of-function nightmare that got its 10 times higher affinity for the ACE2 receptor when compared to the SARS virus, that 10 times increase in affinity for ACE2 could easily have been generated in a laboratory. And the addition of a human-specific protein signal for apoptosis would be a real checkmate problem. It would be a real big, thick nail in the coffin of this question of the virus's origin. A spectacular nail. So I'm going to try and cover it more on the way home. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll see you on the flip side.